Thank you, Louisa. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. How are you doing? It's lovely to see such a lovely crowd with us this evening. And of course, we're all very passionate about the arts and inclusion and performance, etc., etc. So I'm thrilled, delighted, and excited to welcome Adam Benjamin to conversation with me today. I'm Rhona Coughlan, the Artistic Director of Inclusive Dance Cork. Hello, Adam Benjamin. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's very nice to be here, and I'm sorry I can't say hello in person to everybody at the moment, but lovely to see you all. Yeah. Salut. Bonjour. Hello.
Hello. Hello, everybody. It's very exciting, isn't it, Adam? This is a lovely little conversation we're getting to have, isn't it?
It is. It
Yeah,
is.
it is. It is. So we'll start, Adam. So you are Adam Benjamin. Tell me, how how did you start in the area of dance in the first place? How did this all begin for you?
Mm, wow. So uh, my interest in dance really came from um, trying to find a physical practice that wasn't sport. So, my early days that was what was on offer was sport. Where I went to school in London, you didn't want to be a dance. You didn't want to be identified as a dancing boy at that time. It was, yeah, it wasn't good for your health, really. So I didn't even, I was aware of dance, but I was way too scared to get involved in it at that time.
Mm.
And then I found my way into things like Tai Chi and a little bit of martial arts, but I still felt like, well, my, that's not quite it. And it was a kind of revelation around sort of when I was around 26 or so, when I thought actually the Western physical practice, which combines body and art, is dance. And it was kind of, yeah, so it was a rather late awakening. So I found myself going to study dance properly, at university, age 27, and surrounded by kind of young things in leotards, and thinking, what on earth am I doing here? But that was my that was where I went, and that was how I started. So 3 years of kind of uh, really wondering whether I'd made a good life choice.
Mhm.
And then coming out of that with a degree, and then meeting Celeste Andecker, who had been a professional dancer, and when I met her, she was several years, well, quite a few years into her life as a disabled woman, having suffered a spinal injury.
Mm.
Um, and it was that meeting really that led me into inclusive work, or as we called it then, integrated dance.
Mm. And so that meeting of minds then between yourself and Celeste, and your introduction then to inclusive dance or integrated dance as it was known as time, but you know yourself, language is interchangeable. Um, w- why then the impetus to want to bring to the forefront then CandoCo, and how did that all come to be?
Um, I think I met Celeste because she came to a Tai Chi class that I was teaching.
Mm,
Um, well, that was one of the things that connected us anyway. And that was where I saw her move. And I just, when I saw her moving in the class, I just thought, wow, there's so much more that we could do. Um, and the kind of light bulb moment was when I eventually persuaded her to come into the studio, the dance studio, and we were kind of playing and exploring, and we got into a position where she was supporting me on her lap, and then she kind of cradled me in, and that was the light bulb moment, because we had just turned all of the accepted dance kind of tropes on their head, in that she as a disabled person was supporting me,
Mhm. Mm.
and she as a woman was supporting me as a man. And that was something that we just didn't really see at that
Absolutely.
time. And we then started to play and to kind of try out little graphic ideas, and it really grew from there. Just showing little bits and pieces of work, and getting huge interest in what we were doing. Um, so, yeah,
And at that time, Adam, I mean, what time are you speaking?
that was the 1930s.
Da, 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 da. Oh, but that more the 20s. So
No,
this
that was 1990, 1990.
1990. Yeah. So and so you said, you were turning things on their head because, as you so rightly say, it's unusual for a disabled person to be supporting a physically able-bodied person, and for a woman to be physically supporting a man. So what kind of reaction and what kind of reaction were you getting from audiences or people around you, or what kind of conversations were developing from that?
I think it was, I mean, it was very, um, it was a time when there was inclusive work going on already. We weren't the absolute, it didn't all start with us.
Mm,
But I think there had been this kind of period where people were going and watching it and saying, this is good, this is great that this is happening. Um, but choreographically, a lot of the work was really, um, it wasn't really saying very much other than, isn't it good that different people work together? And of course, there was great support for that. But when Celeste and I went to see that work, we went as two professional dancers. So we were watching it through trained eyes, through choreographic eyes, and none of it really satisfied us. And it was that really kind of gave us the impulse to, well, let's, if that's not satisfying us, what will? So we began to make work, and then we were, within a few years of the company kind of starting, we asked other established choreographers like Emlyn Clade and Siobhan Davis, people who were really at the top of their game,
yeah,
to come in and work with us. And again, that was something that hadn't really happened before. Most of the inclusive work that was out there was led by really wonderful, well-meaning, but untrained people.
mm,
Um, so the choreographic level was really, the ceiling, if you like, was very low.
yeah,
So with this group of dancers that we had, all of whom were kind of wild and wonderful and kind of very creative, and then bringing in really established choreographers who were interested in us as a group, that combination, I think, really, it was something that hadn't been seen. So so people were coming attracted not only by the notion of inclusive work, but attracted by the names of those choreographers, and that, to see how they would deal with this this new this new challenge, really.
yeah. And so then, because you brought in the people who were in the know, it raised, as you say, the starting point, or the point that people were thinking was quite low. The benchmark was quite low, and then that brought that, it raised the game,
Yeah.
and then of course to raise the expectation, which is the right way. How do you feel inclusive practice, Adam, is looking now today, and how important do you
I
think
think,
it is?
I think it's a really big question. I mean, I would say it's, there are so many fabulous things happening. There are so many great artists out there now.
Mm,
There are so many disabled led groups and projects. And I think, that was, again, that was a shift that took place, you know 10 years on from CandoCo arriving. You could see this kind of, this generation of disabled dancers who'd come through various companies and who were beginning to kind of go, well, actually, this is all very well and good, but I'd like to be choreographing. I'd like to be directing. Um, so, and there's lots of work out there now that is disabled led. And I think that's really the proof of the pudding, if you like.
Mm.
Um, uh, and
And do you
yeah,
feel moving like where we are now and moving forward, do you think we're in a good place, or do you still think that there's, how important is inclusive work now, and
I
what does
think
that
it's,
look like moving forward?
yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's possible to say anyone in the world is in a good place at the moment.
Yeah,
Um, I, but I think inclusive dance, it's always this kind of crazy thing there are little pockets of, when the world goes mad, which it does seem to be doing at the moment with some aplomb, there are
absolutely.
little pockets of sanity. And I think, those pockets of sanity usually exist within the arts,
Mm,
and certainly within, the world of dance. That the that passing member of the family there,
mm.
slightly in shot. Sorry, that was my bad. I didn't angle
That's
my camera quite right there.
that's all right. All good.
Um, but I think, when we look at the difficulties that exist in the world at the moment,
Mm,
and we look to how do we educate people to see difference as an opportunity, not as a threat. Um,
absolutely.
how, where does that take place? Um, and of course, it's been taking place in a wonderful way in inclusive dance, for the last 20, 30 or more years.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when in Ireland, myself and two friends, and you know this historically, we set up Wheels in Motion in 1994 because there was a need there was a thirst and a hunger for a need of inclusive practice. And we were on the edge, and the only company that I saw at the time was CandoCo, and 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 it Access as well, the beginnings of the work with Access too. But it was just there was such a hunger and a thirst and a need. But also when I co-founded the second inclusive dance company that I was working in, Glan, we knew the importance of bringing in artists that had a really good, strong name. And we knew that by bringing in names with such caliber, that it would raise the profile of the work that we were doing. Otherwise, it can just be seen as quite tokenistic and um, inspirational and all of those things. And so it's raising the game, and that's what everybody wants,
Hmm.
you know. Um, so then you stepped away from CandoCo, and so then you ended up doing more of your own work. Tell me a little bit about more after life after CandoCo. Let's go back a little bit.
I think life after Kanduka for me was kind of breathing point and a moment where I could kind of begin to be creative again. The
Mm,
reality with Kanduka was that it got very, very big, very, very quickly. And I was at that time I was a novice choreographer.
mm,
Um, and already we were headlining in places like, the South Bank, and you'd have 3 nights with, full houses on the South Bank, and your work was being reviewed in kind of the national press.
mm,
And for me, I was, I couldn't be creative in that environment, especially as, by then uh, we were bringing in these kind of great choreographers, and I just needed to go away and make work quietly, which is what I did.
mm,
And refound my mojo as a choreographer, and worked with people like Scottish Dance Theatre and Vertigo and people like Stopgap, and kind of went off, around the world a little bit, and did a lot of work overseas.
mm.
Um, and gave myself the time and the space to make work again, and to research, and to keep digging into what inclusive work meant to me. The reality is when a company gets to a certain size, it becomes a business, and you're caught up in that very demanding and non-artistic world, which is really about money. It's
Yeah.
about, how it's about filling theaters, it's about fundraising, it's about all of those things.
Mm,
And every time we do that with the arts, it's this tragedy where you have something that's creative and beautiful, and then you turn it into a business, and
mm,
it gets swept up. It's what's happened, and is what is happening with our universities. Because that was another step in the journey where I went to higher education and worked there for 10 years.
mm,
But again, you're seeing that environment, the course that I was teaching on has gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Um, and that's happened to a lot of the inclusive and dance programs around the country, and the
mm,
arts are just being slashed.
mm. And
Uh,
why do you feel that it's so important for inclusive practice to exist and training to exist in universities?
well, I think, the point of a university, the whole point of a university is to open young people's minds.
Mm,
For me, and people might say, well, you're not if you're doing an engineering course, or not if you're doing this. I don't agree. I think whatever you need, whatever course of study you go to, a university should be where you meet people who make you go, oh, I never thought of that, or oh, that what's that about, or you know universities should do that.
yeah.
That's the one thing they should do. They should open young people to think about the world in lots of different ways. And a nice example of that is, I was teaching at Plymouth University, and it wasn't a conservatoire. The students that came were, they were lovely, they were interesting, but they weren't the best technical dancers in the world.
Mm,
And um, I established an exchange program with, a kind of visiting exchange program with the Conservatoire in Antwerp.
mm,
And so I would take groups of our students across, and we would do shared workshops. And they there was a wonderful member of staff there, and I'm having a dreadful senior moment because I can't remember her name, but it will come
mm.
back to me. Um,
Right.
I hope she's not here because she'll kill me.
A
Uh,
lovely girl. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but anyway, she had done great work there, and was kind of doing, bringing in kind of different events. And but I remember one day very, very clearly where we were looking at work, inclusive work. And I think it's fair to say that kind of in the studio, my students were a little bit in awe of these conservatoire dancers. They were fabulous and amazing.
Mm,
But we watched a piece of work which was hugely problematic in lots and lots of different ways. And there was kind of discussion and critique after this piece of work. And I watched my students analyze it, think about it, question it, and
mm,
critique it really, really well. And the Belgian students couldn't do that. They were in conservatoire, they were working on their bodies, they were kind of heading towards being professional dancers, and that was all that they were doing.
mm,
Whereas our students were kind of thinking, reading, looking at, kind of digesting, analyzing. And
mm,
I think that inclusive work makes students do that. So we often think of this thing of, oh, wouldn't it be great if we can get disabled dancers into our university programs? Yeah, it would be. But I tell you who it's great for. It's great for the non-disabled students
yeah,
because it does the thing that universities should do. It makes you go, ah,
yeah,
what am I going to do now? There's, for dance students to have that experience really makes them think. and really makes them work and really makes them understand how to problem solve, how to connect, how to think differently, how to think creatively, how to think outside of the box. So, it's often this strange thing where you're having to make a case for, wouldn't it be a good idea if you thought about making your course inclusive? It's not a it's not a good idea. It's a great idea. And it's the thing that's going to educate your students, which
Yeah.
is what universities should be doing. So,
And you know what? When you work, I really fundamentally believe this. When you work inclusively, everybody wins.
mm,
Everybody in the room wins because
yeah,
we're all carrying trauma. We're all carrying something around our body, or somebody told us something, or somebody said no, or somebody said you can't, or somebody said you're not enough, or something, whether whoever you are, we've all got something of that. And the
mm,
minute I feel you're all in a space together, no matter who you are, and you're working in an inclusive, integrated manner, in a real and truthful way, you know, it's a win-win. And all the external stuff and all the difference goes out the window. And
yeah,
it's happened so many times in my work in inclusive practice, where you just see the beauty and the brilliance of dance and movement. It it's the greatest gift that I think that we give ourselves and each other, you know. So what's you and I know each other a very, very long time, Adam, at this point. We've been friends a good couple of years, since 2010, since we had one great conversation which led us here. So you came and did some work with Inclusive Dance Cork, and where you've been involved, heavily involved in our program, based at Dance Cork for Crane. Um, how have you found that, and what did you think of that experience?
I think there's always this kind of question when you travel overseas, or you work with a group, and sometimes you go in and you do a workshop, and then really nothing much happens until the next year, or the next, whenever it is you come back. And I think what's for me, the wonderful thing about IDC is that, you know, I I came over, you were already doing things,
Mm,
there was already stuff going on. Um, but that feeling of a real sustained effort to establish a culture that believes in and supports inclusive practice. Um, and IDC is one of those places where that's happening, and it's happening with real kind of commitment and an understanding from particularly from Firk and Crane, but also there has been support from UCC, but I believe that's gone now.
mm.
Um, but the
And
fact that
yeah, and you're right, and we're lucky with Dance Court. I mean, it's our home, and with all our partners, that everybody's kind of been on the same wavelength of that kind of thinking.
yeah, yeah.
Sorry, Adam, I interrupted you. Apologies.
No, I just think that there's not only the practice at the theatre, but these connections that you've made to higher education, and other educational networks.
Mm,
I just think it's great practice, and it benefits so many people at so many levels.
mm,
Um, and yeah, I'm a great fan, really.
yeah. And vice versa, and vice versa. So what's happening for you? Let's get back to your work. So what's happening to you? What's happening for you from Friday? And tell me
Uh,
about all the lovely working stuff that you're up to at the moment.
well, from Friday I head east. Um, S- so I'm going back out to South Korea. It's a festival there that I've been involved in over the years, and it's the 10th anniversary.
Mm,
And they've asked me to make a piece on their company. So I'm going to go out and do that. Um, I'm then going to travel on to Taiwan. Um, I was supposed to be in Taiwan in 2019, when you know what happened.
that's
So
fun. You've been having there for a few years.
So
Yeah.
I was all set to go, and they said, "Oh, this thing has, this illness called COVID has arrived, and so
Mm.
we can't do the project." And that was that was the beginning project of my year that year. And then, like everyone else, I watched as one by one. It was strange, actually. That was my first project. The next one was going to be in Spain, and they were two of the areas that kind of went down very quickly. So I kind of knew what was coming. But anyway, I'm back. I go back there to do the work that I was supposed to have done back in 2019.
How lovely is that? It's like a real full circle moment. That's
Yeah,
good. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. And then
And
I'll go back to Japan to do some work there, and then meet up with my family in Japan.
okay, and then also you were saying to me that you're working on a duet at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the pandemic saw off my last piece of choreography. We performed it twice, and then that was boom, that was gone.
Mm,
And because it was an international cast, it was very difficult to bring them all back together.
mm,
Um, so that piece has gone off into the ether. But one of the dancers, the disabled performer, Kevin French, approached me a little while back with a suggestion of coming in and making some new work. So this time I've boxed clever, and I've worked with Kevin, who's local, another young dancer who's local, a musician who's local. So everybody is, it's a very close-knit company. Um, and actually, those of you that know one of my projects is the Dancers Forest, which is a kind of a recognition of the implications of touring and traveling within the dance industry. So part of me is quite uncomfortable about that amount of traveling that I'm going to be doing. Um,
mm,
but yeah,
yeah. And so that's, I mean, Adam, that's very exciting, and it's nice that this time you're getting to work with people and locally, and it's it's very much individual, but it's nice core company group as well. Um, Talk to me about a little bit more about the work that you're doing in Germany, because
yeah,
that's big. That's big work. That's big.
mm, yeah. This came about last year when I was called by a a dancer who I worked with 20 years ago, actually, and said, would you be able to come out and have a look at this project? And they'd lost one of their directors, one of their choreographers, and whenever you hear that, you know that things are probably not so not so good.
Mm,
And I said, I tell you what, I'll give you 3 days. I'll come out and you can see how I work, and I can see how you're working, and then. But the thing that really sold it was that the theme was um, uh, uh, the theme was post Second World War trauma. So the trauma of the generation who grew up in the shadow of the war. So my generation, essentially,
mm,
um, but German.
mm,
Um, and I I was just intrigued that about this as a starting place.
mm,
Um, but as a Jew myself, it was also, that was part of my shadow, that growing up in England sort of at that time.
mm,
And I was kind of fascinated. So I went out, and sure enough, it had kind of, the production had got all over the place, and they'd sort of lost their way.
mm.
Not the least that went because it was a shared kind of community project. And when I arrived there, all of the dancers were at one table, the directors were at another table, the musicians were at another table. So it was kind of pretty, kind of like, oh, really, this has gone, yeah. Um, but anyway, I had 3 days with them, loved it, and agreed to go back, and I've been working with them.
How were things looking at the end of 3 days? Were they all sitting at separate spaces, or was it a
No, they were beginning to share tables, actually. We,
good?
um, one of the things I did on my last visit, which I promised myself I would do, was to bring all of the tables together. And we did that, and we had a Shabbat evening. So we lit candles and sat together, and yeah, it was pretty special. It was special for them, I think, and it was special for me. And I think that thing that you were saying, that we all carry trauma. It was, it was it was a moment of I would say it was a moment of light in a time when you know the whole world has gone a bit bonkers.
Yeah.
More than that.
I think one of the things that I hold most dear and is probably one of the most important things to me and a bedrock of my inclusive work is that when we, whether it's IDC or whether it's with Emotion or any other company that I've worked with, because I've worked with quite a few at this point, is we always at the beginning and at the end get into a circle, and I always call it the circle of support, always,
Mm,
because it's really about creating community, breaking down those walls that we tell ourselves, those little messages that we tell ourselves, and might be putting onto each other unknowingly, actually, and just creating a lovely safe space for conversation and creative
yeah.
movement to happen. Because if you don't have that root, then you can't be free to be a complete artist and express yourself in the fullest of your being, really.
Mm.
You know, yeah, Adam, making an entrance, making an entrance. I mean, how did that little gem come to be?
Um, I think it was the the feeling that when in the early days when I was with CandoCo and I was workshopping and going off places and doing stuff, and so often at the end of a workshop there was only one question, which is, when are you coming back? Um, and that notion that there just there were no resources for the
Mm,
work at that time, and um, and I knew that in my work, and I think probably everyone here that's involved in this, we know that although we doubt ourselves enormously, we actually in our practice are learning so much in every workshop.
mm,
Every workshop you'll meet someone and you'll go, oh, how do I do this? Or how's that going to work? Or so we know that we're gatherers of information.
mm,
And I knew by the time I'd spent 5 years workshopping and really starting out like everyone, like just pretending that I knew what I was doing, um,
mm.
and and kind of going into workshops and just kind of going, oh my God, inside panicking at the beginning of every workshop. And but then you kind of go after, well, I've survived a year. Um, and actually I do now know how this works. And I do know that, so this kind of accumulating information. And I realized that really the way forward was to share that information, to make it available. Um, and so, yeah, I just started writing. Most of that book was written in airports or, on trains or, on the way to somewhere to do work.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and it was a kind of labor of love, really.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, it was great. It was great.
How important is it, Adam, do you think it is to make an entrance into a dance space? And one of the things that I most associate with you actually is, how do you leave a space
Mm.
with such energy and do that work and do it well and ethically?
I proposed because I did the second edition of the book last year,
Hmm.
and um, I proposed with all seriousness that I wanted to call it Making an Exit.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but the
Love that.
the publishers wouldn't accept it, and because I think it's actually the most important. It's the most important thing now that we have to learn. How do we leave spaces? How do we leave spaces better than we found them? It's the major question that that humanity faces. How do we leave the the places that we live better for our having been there? And I don't think anyone really teaches this, not in a physical way. So, yes, we've got, green movements, and we've got ecology, and we've got, all of these, these things you can study. But to actually understand how to leave a space with something better in it for your having been there, for your leaving, we don't really teach that. We might kind of, you know, we might kind of try and struggle with it in religious studies, or in philosophy, or but not as a physical practice. So at the time when I wrote Making an Entrance, I was really concerned with how do we bring people into a space that at the moment excludes them.
Yeah.
So that was my, and the, the notion of the title refers both to the dance space and to architecture.
Yeah.
So,
That was going to be my next question. As somebody who's been involved in inclusive practice now for many years, and you're an able-bodied man who's been working in this line for a long time and very informed, but from coming from a different space to me, but informed in different ways, but also have a very similar way of thinking about things. What do you think are the most important things that people need to learn, adapt to make their space or their community or to be more inclusive in a real and authentic way? What are the things that you feel are the most important?
um, that's such a big question. But I think if there isn't physical access, there's there you know there is no way forward. And I think, um, that said, while I was at the university, I was very involved in the building and the design of the new theatre at Plymouth University, which is, you know, really accessible space.
Mm,
There's no dance program now.
mm, yeah.
So, uh, yeah,
From
it,
my thinking, I think you're right. I agree with it. The space needs to be as accessible as possible. I also think it's really important to surround yourself with really, really like-minded people. You got to find your tribe. I think you got to find your tribe and find the people who uh, believe in what you're trying to achieve and that they have a similar way of thinking about going about it to you. And I kind of don't really believe in taking no for an answer in the best possible way, because I think all issues or can be solved. There is an answer to everything. You might have to think outside the box.
mm,
And for me, actually, I don't particularly love that expression, but you know what I mean. But like, there shouldn't be a box. We shouldn't be
mm.
putting anybody into a box. Nobody should be. Everybody should just be themselves. But I think for me, they would be some of the most important things. What were you going to say, Adam?
I think it, absolutely, it helps to gather people who think and who understand that way of thinking. But yeah, you're also right. Certainly when I went to the university, and there was the most horrendously inaccessible new space, and I said, this can't work. You can't, and we made theatre. In fact, Kevin, who I'm making the duet with now, he was a student at that time at the university, and we made work in that space. that highlighted its inaccessibility. So we did all kinds of crazy kind of things where he would, kind of suddenly in the middle of a performance, he would start making noise and kind of trying to get out, and we'd get the lift moving. And so complete disruption of the this performance. And the performance obviously was part of the performance. But finding creative ways to demonstrate the problem is sometimes the best way, because protesting something or kind of arguing something sometimes has the opposite effect. People just kind of, it's another protest.
Mm.
But if you engage people creatively and make them enjoy what you're kind of thinking of again differently. Oh, we never thought about that chairlift that actually takes like 7 minutes and makes a huge noise, and we hadn't realized that that was a real problem until you did it in that show.
Mm.
So kind of finding ways to, as artists, finding ways to, you know you have to find your, I'm not saying this is the way for everyone. I think you, as individual artists or activists or whoever, you have to find the way that you have to find what's your, I want to say weapon, but maybe what's your tool,
Yeah.
the thing that you can use effectively. And that might be dance, or it might be letter writing, or it might be, I don't, you have to,
Whatever that is, whatever that
whatever
skill
it
is.
is. Yeah. And I think it's once you know that, and you know where you are effective, then you don't waste time chipping away at something that doesn't make a difference. You have to find out what your tool is, what your gift is in a way.
Mm.
Once you know it, then you have to find the time and the place to apply it. And that's what leads to effective change. Um, or rather, it's what prevents you burning out.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
I
it's
think,
yeah.
yeah, it's what? What were you going to say?
I think it's all of these different things. So there are some people who just scream and shout for a long time, and some of us think, well, that's not the way to do it. But actually, maybe that's part of it. Maybe some of those people just screaming and shouting, maybe that's part of it. And then there are other people who are very precise and very effective, and they use their ability in a particular way at a particular moment. That's also part of it. So I think it's recognizing that we're all of us who want to do inclusive practice, we are all working at it, and we all have some effect. And I think this is the thing that this is what makes us recognize what inclusive work is.
Mhm.
Is something that we all contribute to in
Yeah.
our way.
Yeah, and you took the words out of my mouth because you just described beautifully how it works in an inclusive dance space. Because we all learn differently. B, we all have different tools and talents and skill, and we all can learn from each other. And I think it would be pretty arrogant, and that's just my own wording, to walk in to a space, whether you're a facilitator or whoever you are in the space, feeling like um you have the sense that you know everything and there's nothing left to learn. There's always something new. I walk into every space and I go, I've light bulbs moments going off all the time. But that's beautifully explained about how inclusive dance works. We all have gifts, we all have talents, and we all have different tools, and we're just arming ourselves with more tools. And then truly everybody wins, whether
Mm,
it's somebody who is able-bodied, whether it's somebody who's got an intellectual disability, whether it's somebody who's got a physical disability, whether somebody who's older, somebody's got not the whatever the perceived body type is, male, female, whoever, everybody is welcome to the dance space,
mm.
because genuinely the arts is for everybody. The arts is for everyone. um, I was going to say something else to you now, but it's popped out of my mind. So Adam, I'm going to open up to, is there anything else you wanted to add or say before I open it
No,
up
no,
to the
it would be
conversation?
lovely
Yeah,
to
get other people's point of view.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you're sick of talking to me now. So yeah, we'll open it up to everybody else if anybody has any questions or comments for Adam.